Marcus Henderson had been a U.S. Marshal for the Northern District of Illinois for 12 years when he walked into Roosevelt Elementary to pick up his 8-year-old daughter and encountered a security guard whose assumptions would destroy a 19-year career and cost the school district $7.2 million. Brian Kowalski was 42 years old enough to understand that credentials matter, and experienced enough to know the difference between an actual threat and a concerned parent. But apparently, he was convinced that his judgment about who belonged at Roosevelt Elementary was infallible, that his instincts about suspicious behavior were never wrong, and that a black man approaching the school office at 3:47 p.m. on a Wednesday couldn't possibly be a father doing exactly what the school pickup policy required. One October afternoon in Chicago's South Loop, Kowalski saw Marcus Henderson through the building's front entrance, made an assumption based on race rather than fact, and initiated a confrontation that included a physical takedown, a knee to the back, handcuffs applied to a federal agent, and all of it witnessed by dozens of parents and children, including Henderson's daughter Maya, who watched her father, a decorated law enforcement officer, treated like a violent criminal for the crime of being black at pickup time. What Kowalski did next, ignoring Henderson's credentials, dismissing the principal's verification, and maintaining that he'd done everything right, would become proof of how racial bias destroys lives, careers, and the trust that communities place in institutions meant to protect children. A black man in his late 30s, Marcus Henderson, was walking through the front entrance of his daughter's elementary school at 3:47 p.m., 7 minutes before dismissal. His U.S. Marshal credentials were in his jacket pocket, clearly visible if anyone had asked to see them. His daughter's emergency contact card, updated 2 weeks earlier with his new work schedule, was in the school system. No weapon visible, no aggressive behavior, no violation of any policy, just a father arriving early for pickup because court had adjourned ahead of schedule. But security guard Brian Kowalski saw him through a filter, so distorted by assumptions about who looked like they belonged at a predominantly white elementary school that he couldn't process a black man in business casual clothing as a legitimate parent. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to light. Roosevelt Elementary School sits on South State Street in Chicago's South Loop neighborhood, 3 blocks west of Grant Park and 4 blocks south of the Financial District. It's a public magnet school that draws families from across the city, known for its STEM program and its diverse student body. The building is a 1920s-era brick structure, 3 stories tall, with tall windows, wide hallways, and a modern security vestibule added during renovations in 2018. That vestibule, a double-door system with bulletproof glass and a buzzer-controlled inner door, was installed to keep students safe. It required all visitors to check in at the office, show identification, and sign the visitor log before proceeding into the building. The pickup policy was clear. Parents could arrive no earlier than 3:40 p.m. They were to wait in the designated pickup area near the main office until dismissal at 3:54 p.m., when teachers would release students to verified parents or guardians. The policy was printed in the parent handbook, posted on the school website, and sent home in the weekly newsletter. Every parent knew it. Every staff member enforced it. It was 3:47 p.m. on a Wednesday in October. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall front windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors. The building was quiet but not empty. Teachers were wrapping up lessons. Administrative staff were preparing dismissal lists, and early arriving parents were already gathering near the office, chatting quietly while they waited. The front vestibule saw steady traffic, a father in a suit returning from downtown, a mother in hospital scrubs coming from her nursing shift, a grandmother with a walker moving slowly toward the waiting area. Normal, routine. The kind of Wednesday afternoon where nothing dramatic typically happens. Marcus Henderson had been a Deputy U.S. Marshal with the Northern District of Illinois for 12 years. 12 years of fugitive apprehension, witness protection operations, and federal prisoner transport. He'd worked cases that required split-second tactical decisions, months of surveillance, and an ability to read dangerous situations before they escalated. He'd arrested gang members, white-collar fugitives, and violent offenders who'd skipped bail on federal charges. He transported federal witnesses through hostile territory and coordinated security for high-profile trials where threats were credible and constant. Before joining the Marshal's service, Henderson had spent 4 years with the Chicago Police Department, assigned to the 11th District on the West Side. He'd worked patrol, responded to domestic violence calls, pursued armed suspects through alleys, and learned early that de-escalation and communication prevented more violence than force ever solved. He'd received commendations for his work, including a Department Commendation Award for saving a child from a burning building, and a life-saving award for administering CPR to a shooting victim until paramedics arrived. His supervisors called him unflappable. His colleagues called him the Marshal, who never lost his cool. In 16 years of law enforcement, 4 with CPD, 12 with the Marshal's service, Henderson had never fired his weapon in the line of duty, not once, because he was good at reading people, good at talking down situations, good at making the arrest without the violence. That skill had earned him respect from fellow marshals, federal prosecutors, and even defense attorneys who'd watched him testify with precision and professionalism. Henderson had graduated from Northern Illinois University with a degree in criminal justice, then completed the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center program in Glencoe, Georgia, where he'd ranked in the top 10% of his class. He'd completed advanced training in fugitive investigation, high-risk warrant service, and tactical operations. He'd been certified in crisis intervention, de-escalation techniques, and use of force protocols. He held active firearms qualifications, defensive tactics, certifications, and had passed annual fitness requirements for 12 consecutive years. He'd received the Attorney General's Award for Distinguished Service in fugitive apprehension after leading a multi-state operation that resulted in the arrest of 47 fugitives wanted for violent federal crimes. He'd been promoted to Senior Deputy Marshal 3 years earlier and was being considered for a supervisory position within the district. At 38 years old, Marcus Henderson was exactly where he'd worked to be, respected in his profession, trusted by his colleagues, and building a life that balanced demanding federal work with being a present father. He was divorced but maintained a strong co-parenting relationship with his ex-wife, Jennifer. They'd agreed to split custody, 50-50, which meant Henderson adjusted his work schedule around Maya's needs: school pickups, soccer practice, homework help, bedtime stories. Maya was 8 years old, bright, curious, and proud of her father's work. She'd tell classmates her dad was a real-life marshal, like the ones in movies, but better because he didn't need to shoot anyone. She knew his schedule better than most kids knew their fathers, because Henderson made sure she always knew when he'd be there. He was the dad who showed up to school concerts, parent-teacher conferences, and class parties. He'd rearranged court testimony to make it to her third-grade science fair. He'd traded shifts with colleagues to chaperone field trips. That Wednesday, Henderson had testified in federal court in the Dirksen Federal Building downtown. The trial had been scheduled to run until 5 p.m., but the defense had rested earlier than expected, and Judge Rodriguez had adjourned at 3:15 p.m. Henderson had texted his ex-wife immediately. "Court ended early. I can do pickup." She'd confirmed. "Perfect. Thanks." He'd driven directly from the courthouse to Roosevelt Elementary, arriving at 3:47 p.m., 7 minutes before the official pickup time, but within the acceptable window that most parents used. He parked on State Street, fed the meter, and walked to the front entrance. He wore dark gray dress pants, a white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and a navy blazer, his standard federal court attire: professional, clean, appropriate. His U.S. Marshal credentials were in his inside jacket pocket where he always kept them, the black leather case with the gold badge and federal identification card. His service weapon was locked in the trunk of his car. He never carried it to Maya's school unless there was a specific security threat that required it. He wasn't on duty. He was just a father picking up his daughter. He looked like what he was, a professional coming from work to collect his child. He'd followed every protocol the school required. He'd texted the other parent. He'd arrived during the designated window. He was on the authorized pickup list that the school maintained for Maya Henderson's file. He'd done nothing to attract attention, nothing to suggest he was anything other than one of the dozen parents already gathering for dismissal. But to security guard Brian Kowalski, Marcus Henderson's presence was a problem, and Kowalski had decided to do something about it. Brian Kowalski was 42 years old. He'd been the security guard at Roosevelt Elementary for 7 years, hired after retiring early from the Chicago Transit Authority, where he'd worked as a supervisor managing bus routes and driver complaints. He was vigilant, rule-focused, and deeply concerned about maintaining what he called a secure perimeter for the school. He wanted Roosevelt to be safe. He wanted parents to feel confident that someone was watching the doors, monitoring who came in, protecting the children from threats that lurked outside. His supervisors, the principal and the assistant principal, described him in evaluations as conscientious but sometimes overly reactive. He'd filed numerous incident reports about suspicious persons near the school, most of which turned out to be parents waiting for their children, delivery drivers making scheduled drops, or community members walking past the building. He'd called police 3 times in 7 years to report potential threats. Each call had resulted in officers arriving to find no crime, no danger, no actual problem. In 7 years at Roosevelt Elementary, Kowalski had compiled a record that should have triggered serious concerns about his judgment and potential bias. 9 formal complaints from parents. 9. 6 of them involved allegations that Kowalski had treated black parents differently than white parents, questioning their right to be on school property, demanding additional identification when white parents were waved through, following black fathers through the hallways while white fathers moved freely. 3 complaints had been sustained after investigation, resulting in written warnings and mandatory implicit bias training through the district's HR department. The other 6 had been classified as misunderstandings or differences in perception, dismissed without formal discipline, but noted in his personnel file. The pattern was clear to anyone who looked at the complaints together. A black father, arriving at 3:45 p.m. for early pickup, was stopped at the door, questioned about why he was early, and required to wait in the vestibule until 3:54 p.m., even though white parents arriving at the same time were allowed to proceed to the waiting area. Kowalski claimed he was enforcing the pickup time strictly that day. A black mother dropping off her son's forgotten lunch at 11:30 a.m. was detained in the vestibule for 15 minutes, while Kowalski called the classroom to verify that the student actually attended Roosevelt, despite the woman's name being clearly listed on the approved contact sheet. Kowalski said he didn't recognize her from previous visits. A black grandfather picking up his granddaughter for a dentist appointment was required to show 2 forms of identification and weight, while Kowalski called the grandmother at work to confirm the appointment, even though the grandfather's name was on the emergency contact card and the appointment had been pre-approved by the office. Kowalski said custody situations required extra caution. Each incident followed the same script. Kowalski saw a black adult at the school entrance, assumed they didn't belong there or needed extra verification, and applied scrutiny that white parents never faced. Each time, the school acknowledged the complaint, noted it in his file, and sent him to a 2-hour training session that he attended but never internalized. The documentation was extensive. The pattern was unmistakable. But somehow Kowalski remained at his post, monitoring the door, making decisions about who looked like they belonged at Roosevelt Elementary. That Wednesday at 3:47 p.m., Kowalski was standing at his usual position just inside the main entrance, watching parents arrive through the security vestibule. He saw Marcus Henderson approach the outer door, scan his ID badge on the reader, and wait for the inner door to unlock. In Kowalski's mind, something didn't look right. Henderson was black. He was tall, about 6'2", and muscular. He wore business clothing, but nothing that identified him as a parent. Kowalski didn't recognize him from previous pickups, which meant this might be his first time, which meant Kowalski needed to be extra vigilant, needed to make sure this man had legitimate business at the school. Never mind that Henderson's daughter had attended Roosevelt for 3 years. Never mind that Henderson had been to dozens of school events. Never mind that the security badge Henderson had just scanned was linked directly to Maya Henderson's family account in the school's system. Kowalski saw a black man he didn't recognize and decided that required intervention. He didn't check the computer system to see if the badge scan had verified Henderson as an authorized contact. He didn't call the office to confirm that Marcus Henderson was listed as a custodial parent for Maya Henderson. He didn't consider that maybe, just maybe, he didn't recognize this parent because Henderson typically did. Evening pickups, and this was an unusual schedule change. He just moved toward the inner door, positioned himself between Henderson and the hallway to the office, and prepared to ask questions. When the inner door unlocked, Henderson pulled it open and stepped into the school's main hallway. Kowalski was there immediately, blocking his path. Henderson looked up, confused. He'd expected to walk straight to the parent waiting area, like he'd done on the few occasions he'd come to Roosevelt for pickup. Instead, he was face to face with a security guard whose body language radiated suspicion. Kowalski's eyes scanned Henderson from head to toe, lingering on his hands, his waistline, his jacket pockets. In Kowalski's mind, this was threat assessment, checking for weapons, watching for signs of aggression, making sure this man wasn't here to cause harm. In reality, it was racial profiling in uniform. He stepped closer to Henderson, closing the distance, using his physical presence to intimidate. Do you think security personnel should face consequences for profiling parents based on race? Drop your answer below. Marcus Henderson was 3 steps into the school hallway when he realized someone was blocking his path. He stopped, looked up, and saw the security guard, a white man, probably mid-40s, wearing a Roosevelt Elementary polo shirt and khaki pants, standing directly in front of him with his arms crossed. Henderson's first thought was confusion. He'd used his security badge. The door had unlocked. He was following the same protocol every other parent followed. Why was this man stopping him? "Sir, stop right there." Henderson stopped. His law enforcement training kicked in automatically. Assess the situation, stay calm, de-escalate. "Good afternoon. I'm here to pick up my daughter." Kowalski's jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed. "You don't have authorization. You need to leave the building." Henderson blinked. "Excuse me? I just scanned my badge at the door. My daughter's name is Maya Henderson. I'm her father. I'm on the pickup list." Kowalski didn't move. "I'm calling this in. Put your hands where I can see them." Henderson felt his stomach drop. He recognized the tone, the posture, the assumption underlying every word. This wasn't about policy or procedure. This was about a security guard who saw a black man and decided he was a threat. "My hands are visible," Henderson said, his voice remaining calm, professional, controlled. "I'm reaching for my wallet to show you identification." "Don't move." I said, "Don't move." Henderson froze. His hands were at his sides. His wallet was in his back pocket. He needed to show this man his ID, his credentials, something to prove he belonged here. But Kowalski was treating him like a suspect, and Henderson knew from 16 years in law enforcement that any sudden movement right now could escalate this into something dangerous. "I'm a U.S. Marshal," Henderson said clearly, loudly enough that other parents in the waiting area turned to look. "My credentials are in my jacket pocket. I'd like to show them to you." Kowalski's expression hardened. "I don't care what you say you are. You're not authorized to be here. Get down on the ground now." Henderson's mind raced. He'd handled situations like this professionally, as the officer, as the marshal making the arrest, as the one with authority. But now he was on the receiving end, and he understood viscerally what it felt like to be seen as guilty before having a chance to prove innocence. "I'm going to reach into my jacket pocket," Henderson said, his voice measured, every word deliberate. "Slowly. I'm retrieving my federal credentials. Watch my hands." He moved slowly, telegraphing every motion. His right hand went to his jacket, opened the flap, and pulled out the black leather credential case. He held it up, opening it to display the gold badge and identification card. "Deputy U.S. Marshal Marcus Henderson, Northern District of Illinois. Badge number 7429. This is my daughter's school. I'm here for pickup." Kowalski glanced at the credentials. His expression didn't soften. "Anyone can buy a fake badge online. Put that away and get on the ground. Or, I'm calling police." Henderson's professional composure cracked, just slightly. "This is a legitimate federal law enforcement credential. You can verify it with one phone call to the U.S. Marshal's Service. You can call the school office and confirm that I'm Maya Henderson's father and that I'm on the authorized pickup list. I'm asking you to do that before this goes any further." Kowalski pulled a radio from his belt. "All units, We have a suspicious individual at the main entrance refusing to comply with security protocols. Request immediate backup. This is where assumptions become accusations. Brian Kowalski had responded to what he perceived as a threat, a black man entering the school. When Henderson tried to prove his identity, Kowalski filtered every piece of evidence through his initial assumption. The credentials had to be fake. The calm demeanor had to be an act. The professional clothing had to be a disguise. Because in Kowalski's mind, black men didn't belong at Roosevelt Elementary except under suspicion. The badge Henderson held was real, issued by the Department of Justice, linked to his federal employment record, verifiable with a single phone call. But Kowalski wasn't looking at the badge as evidence. He was looking at Henderson as a threat, and no amount of evidence could penetrate that assumption once it had taken root. The school office had gone quiet. 3 parents waiting for their children turned to watch. A teacher walking past the hallway stopped, concerned. Someone pulled out a phone and started recording. "I'm not getting on the ground. I'm a federal officer. I've committed no crime. I've followed every school policy. You have no authority to detain me. And you're making a serious mistake." Kowalski moved closer, his hand moving toward Henderson's arm. "Final warning. Get down now, or I will physically remove you." Henderson took a step back, maintaining distance. "You are not touching me. I'm complying with every reasonable request. But I'm not getting on the ground in my daughter's school because you've decided I look suspicious." A woman's voice cut through the tension. "Brian, what's going on?" Henderson looked past Kowalski and saw Principal Rebecca Walsh approaching from the office, her expression confused and concerned. Kowalski half turned. "Principal Walsh, this individual claims he's here for pickup, but refuses to provide proper identification. I showed him my U.S. Marshal credentials," Henderson said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I scanned my security badge at the door. I'm Marcus Henderson, Maya Henderson's father. This is the 3rd year my daughter has attended this school." Walsh's eyes widened. She recognized Henderson from school events, from parent-teacher conferences, from his name on every form Maya Henderson had ever submitted. "Mr. Henderson, I'm so sorry. There's been a misunderstanding," Kowalski interrupted. "I don't recognize him. He refuses to comply with security protocols." "Brian," Walsh said firmly, "Mr. Henderson is absolutely authorized to be here. He's on Maya's pickup list. He's been to numerous school events. You can verify his identity in the security system right now. The badge could be fake. I'm following protocol for unidentified individuals. Should schools require security guards to check authorized pickup lists before detaining parents? Let me know what you think." Henderson saw it coming before it happened. Kowalski's weight shifting, his hands coming up, his decision made. "Don't touch me," Henderson said, loud and clear. "Principal Walsh has verified my identity. You have no legal basis to—" Kowalski grabbed Henderson's arm, twisting it behind his back. Henderson's law enforcement training took over instinctively. He resisted the hold, breaking Kowalski's grip with a controlled defensive maneuver designed to prevent injury. But Kowalski interpreted resistance as aggression. What happened next took less than 10 seconds, but would play out in frame-by-frame detail in courtroom testimony, on viral videos, and in Maya Henderson's nightmares. Kowalski attempted a takedown, sweeping Henderson's leg and driving him toward the floor. Henderson, bigger and trained in defensive tactics, stayed upright briefly. Kowalski called for help on his radio. 2 staff members, a male PE teacher and the assistant principal, ran toward them. Henderson put his hands up, palms out, a universal sign of non-aggression. "I'm not resisting. I'm a federal marshal. Stop this right now." Kowalski tackled Henderson from the side, using his full body weight. They went down hard. Henderson's head hit the polished floor. Kowalski's knee went into Henderson's back, pinning him down. Kowalski pulled handcuffs from his belt, the kind security guards aren't supposed to carry, but do anyway, and snapped them onto Henderson's wrists behind his back. The metal bit into Henderson's skin. The hallway erupted. Parents shouted. Children started crying. Someone screamed, "He's hurting him!" Another voice. "He said he was the girl's father." And through it all, one voice that cut through everything else. "Daddy!" Maya Henderson stood in the hallway, released early from her classroom by a teacher who hadn't heard the commotion. She was 8 years old, holding her purple backpack, staring at her father, her Marshal father, her hero father, the man who protected people for a living, handcuffed face down on the school floor. While a security guard knelt on his back, Marcus Henderson felt his heart break. "Maya, sweetheart, don't look. It's okay. I'm okay." But it wasn't okay. None of this was okay. Principal Rebecca Walsh had seen enough. "Brian, get off him right now. Remove those handcuffs immediately. That's an order." Kowalski didn't move. He stays restrained until police arrive. "Police are not coming because there is no crime," Walsh said, her voice ice cold. "Mr. Henderson is a custodial parent authorized for pickup. You just assaulted a federal law enforcement officer in front of students and parents. Remove the handcuffs now, or I'm calling Chicago police to arrest you for battery." The assistant principal, Tom Reeves, knelt beside Henderson. "Mr. Henderson, are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" Henderson's voice was tight with pain and rage. "I need these handcuffs off me, and I need my daughter to be somewhere else, so she doesn't have to watch this anymore." Walsh pulled out her phone and within 30 seconds had Maya Henderson's file pulled up on the school's security system. "Brian, look at this screen. Marcus Henderson, custodial parent, full pickup authorization, verified emergency contact, background check completed and approved. He's been on this list for 3 years." She scrolled further. "And here's his badge scan from 4 minutes ago. The system logged his entry as an authorized contact. You had access to this information the entire time you were detaining him. You chose not to check it." Kowalski's hands finally released the handcuffs. Henderson rolled onto his side, breathing hard, his wrists raw and bleeding slightly, where the metal had cut into his skin. Walsh helped Henderson sit up. "Mr. Henderson, I am profoundly sorry. This should never have happened. I need you to tell me if you're hurt, and then I need you to tell me what you want to do." Henderson looked at Maya, who was crying silently, being comforted by her teacher. "I want my daughter to know I'm okay. Then I want to file a report. Then I want to talk to my attorney." Walsh turned to Kowalski with an expression that promised consequences. "Give me your security badge. Give me your radio. You are suspended effective immediately pending a full investigation." "But I was protecting the school. You were racially profiling a parent. You ignored verification protocols. You physically assaulted a federal officer in front of children. You traumatized an 8-year-old girl who just watched her father get tackled and handcuffed for picking her up from school. Give me your badge." Kowalski handed them over, his hands shaking. For the first time, the reality of what he'd done seemed to be sinking in. Walsh turned back to Henderson, who was now standing, rubbing his wrists, trying to compose himself enough to comfort his daughter. "Mr. Henderson, on behalf of Roosevelt Elementary and Chicago Public Schools, I offer my sincerest apology. What happened here was inexcusable. I will personally ensure that this incident is fully investigated, that you receive all documentation you need, and that Maya receives whatever support she needs after witnessing this. You have my word that we will do everything in our power to make this right." Henderson's response was measured but clear. "Your apology is noted, but this isn't about making it right. You can't make it right. My daughter just watched a security guard treat her father like a criminal because of his skin color. You can't undo that. What you can do is recognize that this is a pattern, that your security guard has done this before to other black parents, and that your district ignored the complaints until he finally attacked someone with the resources to fight back." He looked at Maya, then back at Walsh. "I will be documenting everything. I will be contacting my attorney, and I will be pursuing every legal remedy available to ensure this never happens to another parent at this school. Should officers and security personnel who assault parents based on racial bias face criminal charges? Drop your answer." Within 90 minutes, cell phone footage from multiple parents had been posted to Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and local Chicago news tip lines. The videos showed everything: Henderson entering the school, scanning his badge, being confronted by Kowalski, showing his credentials, being grabbed, being tackled, being handcuffed, and Maya's devastating cry of, "Daddy!" as she watched her father pinned to the floor. U.S. Marshal tackled and handcuffed by school security, while picking up his daughter, federal agent detained at elementary school for existing, while Black Chicago school security guard attacks Marshal in front of students. The outrage was immediate and volcanic. The Chicago office of the U.S. Marshal's Service issued a statement calling the incident deeply disturbing and wholly unacceptable. The Fraternal Order of Police condemned Kowalski's actions. The NAACP demanded an immediate investigation. Civil rights organizations called for criminal charges. Brian Kowalski's life imploded within 24 hours. Chicago Public Schools placed him on unpaid administrative leave, pending a comprehensive investigation. The district issued a public statement apologizing to Marcus Henderson and Maya Henderson, and announcing that all security personnel would undergo mandatory anti-bias retraining. Kowalski released a brief statement through his union representative. "I was following security protocols to protect students. I regret that the situation escalated." The statement was met with widespread condemnation. Protecting students didn't mean profiling parents. Following protocols didn't mean ignoring the school's own security system verification. Marcus Henderson contacted civil rights attorney Amanda Chen 3 days after the incident. Chen had successfully litigated several high-profile cases involving racial profiling by law enforcement and security personnel. She reviewed the cell phone videos, read through Kowalski's complaint history from his personnel file, obtained through FOIA requests, and reached a conclusion. This wasn't just assault. This was a federal civil rights violation. The lawsuit, filed 6 weeks later, named Brian Kowalski personally, Principal Rebecca Walsh for supervisory negligence, Chicago Public Schools, and the Chicago Board of Education. The claims were comprehensive and devastating. Assault and battery against a federal officer, false imprisonment without legal authority, violation of the Fourth Amendment, unlawful seizure without probable cause, violation of the 14th Amendment, denial of equal protection based on race, racial profiling and discrimination under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, intentional infliction of emotional distress on both Marcus Henderson and Maya Henderson, negligent supervision and retention of an employee with documented pattern of racial bias, failure to properly train security personnel on implicit bias and de-escalation. The complaint included Kowalski's complete complaint history, 9 incidents over 7 years, 6 involving allegations of racial bias against Black parents, 3 sustained complaints that resulted in nothing more than warnings and training that clearly didn't work, all documented, all ignored, all leading inevitably to this moment, when Kowalski's bias finally exploded into violence. The filing also included expert testimony from child psychologists about the trauma Maya Henderson had experienced, witness statements from parents who'd recorded the incident, and documentation from the U.S. Marshal's Service, verifying Henderson's credentials and federal authority. Chicago Public Schools attorneys reviewed the evidence and reached a conclusion fast. This case was indefensible. The cell phone videos were everywhere. The federal credentials were legitimate. The complaint history showed clear pattern. The trauma to an 8-year-old child who witnessed her father's assault was undeniable. The plaintiff was a decorated federal law enforcement officer with impeccable credibility. The district settled within 8 months. The terms were staggering: $7.2 million paid to Marcus Henderson and Maya Henderson, with $1.5 million specifically allocated to Maya's future therapy and educational needs. Mandatory implementation of new security protocols requiring badge scan verification before any parent could be questioned or detained. Immediate termination of Brian Kowalski. Comprehensive anti-bias training for all CPS security personnel, conducted by independent civil rights experts. Annual audits of complaint patterns for all security staff, with automatic suspension after 3 complaints involving allegations of racial bias. Public apology from the Board of Education. Brian Kowalski was terminated 7 weeks after the incident. The termination letter was final, comprehensive, and made clear that his employment ended not just because of one incident, but because of a pattern that CPS had failed to address. Mr. Kowalski physically assaulted a custodial parent, Marcus Henderson, a Deputy U.S. Marshal, without cause or legal authority. He ignored available verification systems, dismissed legitimate federal credentials, and used physical force against an individual who posed no threat to student safety. This incident represents the culmination of a documented pattern of discriminatory behavior spanning 7 years, including 9 formal complaints, 6 alleging racial bias, and 3 sustained findings that resulted in training Mr. Kowalski failed to internalize. His actions traumatized an 8-year-old student, endangered CPS's relationship with the federal law enforcement community, and exposed the district to significant legal liability. His employment is terminated immediately, without appeal rights under his union agreement due to the severity of misconduct. Kowalski's security license was revoked by the state of Illinois. His name was flagged in employment background check systems. His 7-year security career ended at age 42. His union declined to appeal the termination after reviewing the video evidence. Kowalski released no further public statement. Marcus Henderson testified at a Chicago Board of Education hearing on school security reform. His testimony was powerful, precise, and delivered with the same calm professionalism that had marked his entire law enforcement career, even under pressure. I'm a Deputy U.S. Marshal with 12 years of federal service and 16 years total in law enforcement. I've arrested fugitives, transported dangerous prisoners, and protected federal witnesses whose lives depended on my judgment and training. I know what actual threats look like. I know how to assess danger. I know the difference between someone who poses a risk and someone who's just trying to pick up their daughter from school. He paused, letting the words settle. On October 18th, I walked into Roosevelt Elementary at 3:47 p.m. I scanned my security badge. The system verified my authorization. I walked through the door, following the exact same protocol every other parent follows. And within 90 seconds, I was on the ground with a knee in my back, handcuffed, in front of my 8-year-old daughter. Because your security guard saw a black man and decided I was a threat. Another pause. Your security guard had 9 complaints in 7 years. 9. 6 of them specifically alleged racial bias against black parents. 3 were sustained. And yet Brian Kowalski remained at his post, making decisions about who belonged at Roosevelt Elementary, until he finally attacked someone with the resources and credentials to fight back. His voice hardened. You know what 9 complaints in 7 years tells you? It tells you this wasn't about one bad day. It wasn't about a misunderstanding. It was about a pattern your district saw, documented, and chose to ignore until that pattern destroyed a little girl's sense of safety in her own school. He looked directly at the board members. The city paid $7.2 million. That's accountability. Brian Kowalski was fired. That's consequence. But money doesn't erase what my daughter saw. Money doesn't erase the nightmares she's had every night since October 18th. Money doesn't erase the moment when she learned that even her father, a federal marshal, can be treated like a criminal because of the color of his skin. The room was completely silent. If this can happen to me, with my badge, my credentials, my 16 years of service, what happens to parents who don't have federal authority? What happens to the black mothers and fathers who get stopped, questioned, detained, but don't have the resources to fight back? What happens to their children who learn the same lesson Maya learned, that their parents can be treated as threats just for existing? Should patterns of racial bias complaints trigger automatic termination before violence occurs? Drop your answer. This wasn't just about one afternoon at Roosevelt Elementary. This was about a school district that let a security guard accumulate 9 complaints over 7 years, 6 involving allegations of racial profiling, and decided that written warnings and ineffective training were sufficient responses until that pattern escalated to physical violence against a federal officer. Brian Kowalski's complaint history told the story. Chicago Public Schools didn't want to acknowledge. 9 complaints over 7 years. 6 specifically involved allegations that Kowalski treated black parents differently than white parents, questioning them more aggressively, demanding additional verification, following them through hallways, creating an atmosphere of suspicion that white parents never experienced. The pattern was undeniable. Kowalski saw black parents as threats requiring heightened scrutiny. Each complaint was investigated in isolation, treated as a one-off incident, resolved with training that clearly didn't work. The district never connected the dots, never asked why the same security guard kept generating the same complaints about the same bias. Never considered that maybe, just maybe, 3 sustained findings of discriminatory behavior should disqualify someone from making security decisions at an elementary school. Brian Kowalski's career is over. That's justice. The district paid $7.2 million. That's accountability. New protocols require badge verification before detention. That's reform. But money doesn't give Maya Henderson her sense of safety back. Termination doesn't erase the video of her father being tackled. New protocols don't undo the trauma of watching someone you trust, a security guard in your school, treat your father like a violent criminal. The real question is, what changes now? Do school districts finally remove security personnel after 3 sustained bias complaints instead of 9? Do administrators finally connect the dots when the same guard keeps generating the same complaints about the same discriminatory behavior? Do we finally acknowledge that credentials, badges, and professional clothing mean nothing when bias has made its decision about who belongs and who's a threat? Because if we don't fix the systems that kept Kowalski at his post despite 6 complaints alleging racial bias, if we don't address the culture that taught him to see black parents as suspicious rather than as the same concerned families that white parents represent, then we're just waiting for the next Brian Kowalski, the next Marcus Henderson, the next Maya who watches her parent get treated like a criminal for the act of showing up. Comment if you believe this should be mandatory. Security personnel at schools who receive 3 or more sustained complaints involving racial bias must be terminated immediately, with no opportunity for retraining, because the safety of children includes the safety of not teaching them that their parents are threats based on race. And if you think these stories need to be told, if you believe accountability starts with pressure and change starts with awareness, then hit that subscribe button. We're not stopping. We're going to keep exposing the patterns that institutions ignore until someone with power fights back. We're going to keep demanding better for the federal marshals, the concerned parents, the 8-year-old children who deserve to see their parents treated with dignity. This isn't just about one security guard or one school or one marshal. It's about all of us and the systems we're willing to accept, the biases we're willing to tolerate, the children we're willing to traumatize, because challenging authority feels harder than acknowledging that sometimes the people wearing badges and uniforms are the ones creating the danger.